and the anxiety is still there and they might not feel like they can overcome it. They might have noticed that maybe mom, dad, sister, brother has learned that type of behavior, and so they might be more predisposed to having anxious thoughts.
Anxiety develops as a result of a habit of worrying. So it's not that you don't necessarily have to have had anything bad happen to you for you to be an anxious person. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Evolve Ventures, where we are making evolution possible for growth-minded humans through vulnerable lessons, stories, and everyone's favorite, technology. I am your host, Bianca Thomas.
And I am your host, Emilia Smith. Welcome back, like Bianca said. So hopefully the last couple of episodes have you feeling all the vibes and your life is improving 1% than it had prior to jumping in this episode. For our new listeners, welcome. Hopefully this episode will help you walk away with some tangible tips, some strategies, some thoughts that maybe need to get shifted around or interrupted. Because for episode 138, recognizing and defeating your anxiety, we know at Evolve Ventures how vital it is to talk about some of this stuff. I know our last episode or 2 episodes ago, we got into depression and some of the conversation around that. And I know, B, you have kind of like a disclosure that we want to put out there, because this is not necessarily a diagnostic stuff that we're going to be talking about, but rather we want to open up the conversation for our incredible community, because I know when we were growing up, when we were going through our growth journey, there certainly were not enough conversations that were happening.
B, I know you have a disclosure. Here's the disclosure.
No, well, one of the things that we had mentioned was making sure that when you go into learning about the defeating like anxiety and depression, we had said make sure evidence-based systems are used for the people, right? Yeah. So seeking those out. And I think just, with your clinical background, my background, I think that has shown to be really, really important if you are struggling in this capacity, because there's a lot of people out there that don't use evidence-based approaches. And that's been something that we've found the unfortunate way through our experience.
So, like Emilia said, I am a clinical mental health counselor. So all of the feedback and all of the tools and strategies and all of the advice and just the conversation that we're going to be having in this episode and in the one that we were talking about depression, it is coming from a evidence-based background. I'm not just giving feedback out of my ass, unfortunately, like a lot of people do. I'm just gonna be blunt. It is what it is. Yeah. There is tangible data and evidence backing this, and if anyone wants resources into any of this stuff, or like where I'm getting this information from, please reach out. I am happy to give the tangibles of like where this information is coming from, but just for the sake of time, I'm not going to disclose like in this research paper written in 1975, like whatever. Like no one cares. Most people don't care. But it is from evidence-based sources. So I do want to say that, and to Emilia's point, these episodes where we're talking about mental health, these are not intended for diagnosing, right? We are not here to slap on a diagnosis or to have this be like a replacement for going and actually talking to someone and seeking clinical or medical attention. So I really just wanted to be open about that. So for anyone who heard the depression episode, you guys heard how freaking hot and bothered I got in that episode, because I get so mad about all of the misinformation out there. And because of that, the amount of stigma and misunderstanding and mistruths and misdiagnoses and all of the needless suffering and pain and challenges that people go through, that it doesn't have to be that way. And we were talking about depression in that last episode, and in this one we're going to be talking about anxiety. And in all honesty, a lot of the misunderstandings about depression It's actually very similar when it comes to anxiety, right? You're just in your head, you're thinking too much. Oh my God, you're just being dramatic. Oh, you just need to stop thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, buddy, if that advice actually worked, if that advice was actually like credible, nobody would have anxiety. But that's not the case. When you're thinking about anxiety and fear are two very different things. They have similar underpinnings, but they're very different. Fear is a biological reaction, right? If you hear a loud noise and you like are jolted, that's fear. If you see a freaking bear in the woods, that's fear. That's not anxiety, that's fear. It is a biological response, and that's where like the 4 F's come into play, right? Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. That's where that comes into play. Anxiety is very different. Anxiety is anticipation. Anxiety is more future oriented. Fear is present oriented. Depression is actually more past oriented. Right? So like depression is you're feeling sadness and pain now over your life now and over things that have happened in the past. Fear is, holy shit, there's something in front of me right now. I'm scared. There's a threat to my life, or there's a threat to my well-being. Anxiety is very anticipatory. What if this happens? What if that happens? What about this? What about that? Well, that could happen. What does this mean? What does that mean? It's very ruminative. It's like all of these thoughts and these fears are on repeat, and we're anticipating that something bad is going to happen. That's really one of like the underlying mechanisms of anxiety. It's this really intense fear that something bad's going to happen and we're not going to be able to handle it. So we're overestimating the situation, right? We're catastrophizing, we're blowing it up. We're blowing up the fact that something bad could happen. We're also reducing our own capability. We're diminishing our own capability. I'm not going to be able to handle it. That's why the anxiety is so bad.
Yeah.
Because something bad could happen and I can't do anything. So what does our brain do? It tries to make sense of it. Let's ruminate. Let's think of every possible outcome. Let's think of every possible thing that could happen to quote unquote prepare ourselves for when this thing does happen. Because if I can sit there and think about it for 24 hours, maybe I'll be able to handle it when it comes up. Anyone who has anxiety knows that that shit does not work. Like,
For sure.
You can sit there and think about a scenario over and over and over and over, but then when you're actually like in the scenario, it's like everything goes out the window. You
Nothing
lose
else
all of
matters.
it. You said you had a story.
I
I was pausing for you to just slide in there and tell your story.
I'll just slide into your DMs right now. All right,
It goes down in the DMs. It goes down. It goes down in the DMs.
So if you listen to our last episode, not the last one, but 2 from now, when we did talk about depression. So we're going to bring the light to some of these heavier things, and that's definitely our intention. And I want to share a real life experience, a story that actually really does encompass this, that I had recently, and be like, I know we'll be able to kind of pitch and catch and pull things out in this. So I think it will really, really bring this down to earth, and I'm excited for it. And I'm honestly experiencing constructing anxiety right now, because me thinking about that experience and having to quote unquote relive it through the storytelling is bringing up anxious feelings. So my physiology is starting to shift, right? So, but
That's a trauma response, just
it
FYI.
is. And here's the reason why, because our brains are so good at predicting behavior and constructing things, scenarios, experiences, etc. Right? The brain's always looking for patterns and trying to see how it can prevent you from like dying emotionally, dying physically, dying spiritually, like all these things, right? We're aware of this. Cool. All right. So my birthday weekend. For my birthday, what I really love to do is I love to go on hikes. I am a nature fiend. I love plants. I'm a hippy dippy at the core to some extent. And For those of you who follow me, you'll probably find more out about plants than about my real life. We got to change that up. No, but in all reality, I really like to pull aspects of nature into this mental health because I think it's really, really important when we start to talk about these things. So my goal, and I shared this with Alan, was every single birthday I want to hike one of the largest peaks in whatever state we're in. And for this birthday that happened a couple of weeks ago, we ended up going to New York. So for those of you who are familiar with New York and the mountains that exist there that are the tallest peaks, you have the Adirondacks and you also have the Catskills Mountains. So in the Catskills mountain range, that's what we chose to go hiking. And Slide Mountain was the mountain that we chose. I wanted the highest mountain. I wanted to see the foliage. I wanted to see like literally fall at its essence. When you can imagine like the perfect New England, quote unquote, like Google picturesque desktop background with like all the different colors of trees. That's what I wanted in my bougie birthday trip with respects to like, that's literally all I wanted. I just wanted to be at the peak of a mountain and have that, here's that quote, peak experience. And
New England.
Hashtag New England, go New York, right? So to that, man, did I have a peak experience. Anxiety wasn't really there, honestly, when we started getting started, right? We go up, it's approximately 4,200 feet. So for those who haven't really hiked before, that is quite the hike. And it typically takes around 3 hours on average just to get to the top of the mountain where the lookout is, right? Where you can see, right? So the average human, if you will, takes 3 hours to get up. Alan and I were on a time crunch. And to be honest, we didn't do a good job planning, right? So we ended up starting that mountain trek at it's probably like around like 3:30. So like we did not gauge the time right. You know, some of us and you know, at the end of the day, we're going to plan more effectively. But we make it up there at a very fast clip, probably at like an hour and a half. Go us. Cool.
Were you
awesome.
Sprinting?
We were pretty much, because what we were realizing in real time was like, holy crap, we didn't necessarily factor into the fact that we actually have less sunlight than we realized, and now clouds are coming in, where the weather before didn't really say that it was going to be super cloudy. It was supposed to be like a nice, beautiful overlook. All right, so you can kind of catch with me what's going to be happening, right? So we're running against daylight, where essentially we're running up the mountain and we're saying there's going to be a point at which we need to acknowledge the fact that we didn't plan effectively and turn back. Because when you're climbing a mountain like that and you're not prepared in the capacity that we were not prepared, in terms of like you're facing cold, you're facing all sorts of like different experiences with like, you know, you didn't come with a first aid pack, all these things, right? You should probably turn around if you're not at least 2/3 of the mountain by the time that the sun is setting. And so what's happening as the time starts ticking? If we're not keeping up and if we're not keeping pace, our egos are up against that. Like, well, if we don't turn around now, there is a chance that we might be making the trek back down in the dark. So as we're going up, our egos are like, nah, we got this. We're not going to fail. Like, come on. This is what we came to New York for. We had a whole weekend. Awesome. We are just about making it up at the top here. And I vividly remember this. All right. So we're literally, we check our watch, you know, we check the map that we had on our phone. My phone's just about dying and everything. He's got a phone, right? So whose anxiety is building right now? You're, you know, putting the story together. So we're like, all right, we're like, yeah, we can make it to the top. It's fine. We'll see it. We're about, you know, 2/3 of the way there. And we realized the map that we were zoomed into, it actually needed to get zoomed into more. So we ended up making it to the lookout. The sun has already set. And because of our elevation being so high, it actually, in theory, was setting for anyone that's on the ground level a lot sooner, right? So all of the sudden, we end up in real time being simultaneously grateful, which it's probably on my Instagram, that photo where like we're on the lookout and I'm looking back like, this is awesome. We got the view that we wanted, a little bit cloudier. But my heart, what starts happening? Anxiety starts riddling my body. my brain starts thinking about the future to what you had said, B, where, oh my goodness, all of these data points that we have, that just took us an hour and a half to get up in the daylight at a fast clip. Now we're going to have to go back down the mountain in the dark when we don't realize we're unprepared. There could be bears. There could be mountain lions.
Can I pause you?
Please.
That's not anxiety. That's fear.
Tell me. Yes, exactly.
Okay,
So,
I thought you were trying to say that's anxiety. I'm like, that's not anxiety. That's fear.
anxiety is building because it's like the anticipation is happening. I'm projecting out into the future what's happening.
The climb up the mountain was anxiety. It's like, oh my God, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And that like
Yes.
that anxiousness. But
Yes.
the going down, you are actually facing fear because you have a direct threat of something could actually be there.
And this is really what I wanted to get to.
Oh, okay.
I end up
Sorry, I just needed to make
you're
sure.
Good. You're good. No, I'm glad you're saying that because someone might also be like, wait a second. So in real time, the anxiety was building as I was going up that mountain. And there was a moment where fear started to kind of creep in because that was the reaction of the reality. It wasn't just projecting the future. It was actually the reality. So you have a phase in of fear, phase out of anxiety, because now you're starting to get into the present moment where you can't turn back. And so in the real moment when we're at the top, fear has now set in, and subconsciously, what essentially I'm experiencing is the anxiety that I had, that now is my reality. My reality is where fear has set in, where there is a statistical probability that something really, really bad could happen. This was the key point for me. And this is what is really probably a big, I don't want to say a huge difference, but when you're in that arena where something could happen, your brain knows that. But the difference between you making it up the stairs, going to sit on your couch or going to watch TV, and you're anxious about the next day's job where you won't have something happen to you, but the brain thinks it does. That's a big difference between when you're headed down the mountain and you know that you are in the arena. So there's legitimacy to your fear. But the question was that I had to ask myself to work through that was, what is the statistical probability of something bad happening? And that helped to alleviate the fear. But I noticed as the fear started to alleviate, anxiety still kind of crept in. So I share this real life experience because that in the moment is the big difference between the fear and the anxiety, at least for me. So bring this back down to, that was a mountain, that was a hike where and afterwards we realized that was really not intelligent. But defeating anxiety looks so different in your day-to-day when you're not climbing up mountains that are 4,200 feet. What is that like? Really, what does that look like on your day-to-day? Because it might feel as though we're climbing that 4,200 mountain on our every single day, and we might not be able to separate where, oh, okay, there's actually not a bear there. We actually might not get hurt in this scenario. How do we recognize this, and how do we ultimately defeat this? Because honestly, I think in real time, I was working through overcoming and defeating not only anxiety, but also fear. And that was an extremely transformative moment because nothing bad happened. But I know that people have had, quote unquote, bad experiences before, which helps to hike up their anxiety, or they might not have ever before. And the anxiety is still there, and they might not feel like they can overcome it. They might have noticed that maybe mom, dad, sister, brother has learned that type of behavior, and so they might be more predisposed to having anxious thoughts.
Anxiety develops as a result of a habit of worrying. So it's not that you don't necessarily have to have had anything bad happen to you for you to be an anxious person. But if you grew up, let's take the biopsychosocial model again, what we were talking about. Genetically, let's break all of them down for a second, and then I promise I will go into how do you actually start overcoming this, but you have to understand the underlying parts of it first. We are all genetically wired differently. So the biological component is you might have just been born with an anxious temperament. Right? Like, we're all born with different temperaments and personalities, just like right off the bat. It doesn't matter where you were plopped. It's like you independently have your own temperament. And if your mom or your family, if there's a genetic predisposition to anxiety, there's a higher probability, there's a higher chance of you getting it. You know, it's like if everyone in your family had brown hair, but there's a few people that had blonde hair, well, you have a higher chance of having brown hair, right? It's just, it kind of works like that, right? There's a higher chance of you developing it. Now, it doesn't mean that it's gonna become anything, but there's a higher probability of it impacting you. So we have a genetic predisposition for it. Okay, cool. For those of us that don't, well, what were you surrounded by? Did you grow up in a family where mom was constantly worrying about what about this and what about that and what about this and what about that and what about this and what about this all over the place? Did you grow up having to constantly worry about what was going to happen? Even if nothing bad happened, was that what you were surrounded by? Did you end up living in an area where you did have to constantly worry about something bad could happen?
Yeah.
It's not. This is the misconception that, oh, you're just scared of nothing. Oh, what you're experiencing, it isn't real. So why are you actually scared? Well, exactly. There doesn't have to be anything actually going on. Your experience is still real. Just because there's nothing actually happening, it doesn't mean that your brain is not anticipating something bad happening. So anxiety is this constant, overwhelming catastrophizing of the things that are happening. So like when I was talking about the depression in the depression episode, your thoughts, your mind is constantly interpreting and making meaning of all of the scenarios happening around you. And it's jumping to the conclusion that the worst possible thing is going to happen and you're not going to be able to deal with it. So what does it do? It plays it on repeat so that you can try to make sense of it, try to become familiarized to it, and try to figure out how to deal with it. The problem is that the fear that the anticipation that you're experiencing, it might not be valid. That's not to say that what you're feeling is not valid, but the interpretation is not valid. So to Emilia's point, what is the probability of this thing actually happening? This is where the therapy comes into play, and this is the tools that I will now give to everyone watching and listening to this, okay? I said this in the last episode. You guys are going to roll your eyes. Oh my God, you keep freaking talking about this damn thing. Thought records, literally, the reason I preach it so much is because they work.
They work.
Hashtag just evolve. Hashtag they work. Hashtag just do what I say. No, I'm just kidding. No, but really. If you don't want to do a full blown out thought record, fine. But start identifying where are you finding your thoughts constantly taking you? What are the patterns? What are you constantly anxious about? Is it a specific thing? Is it a specific idea? Are you assuming that the worst possible outcome is going to happen? Do you magnify things? Do you catastrophize them? Are you minimizing your capabilities? Are you jumping to conclusions? Are you mind reading? Are you doing all of these cognitive distortions or these unhelpful thought patterns? Because probably you are, and that's why you're feeling anxious. That's why you're experiencing the amount, the intensity, the duration, and the frequency of anxiety that you're feeling. Because your mind has been so, and your brain has been so conditioned over a long period of time to think in these types of patterns that it feels real. It's called emotional reasoning. You feel terrified, so you're convincing yourself that something scary is happening, that something bad is happening. The problem is that when you're so caught up in it, you're not giving yourself the opportunity to see that there's actually nothing going on. That it's the intensity and the amount that you are believing these thoughts, that you are convincing yourself that they are true, and therefore validating the anxiety, validating the need to have to constantly worry. So if you can start to pinpoint and recognize, what does my anxiety look like? Then you can do the second part, which is exactly what I do with clients. Again, cognitive restructuring. It's actually helping you to see more clearly. I don't want to say rationally, because I don't like rational versus irrational. It's like, what's irrational? You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
It's to help you see things differently. It's to help you see things just better or more accurately.
I was just going to say
I guess.
That.
Yeah, just more accurately, and helping to learn to problem solve. Like, okay, what if the worst possible thing happens? What would that mean? What's going to happen if that does happen? Okay, what are you going to do? Because the second component of this is what I said. We diminish ourselves and convince ourselves that we can't handle it if it does happen. We convince ourselves that we're incapable. So it's like, well, if this happens, I can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
But that's not true. You're convincing yourself that that's true. So this episode, again, this is not a fix, right? This is just to help you start recognizing, like, are you noticing this? Are you experiencing this? Give you some tools to try to do it yourself. But if you're noticing this, go talk to somebody. Because what happens for a lot of people is, if you've been dealing with anxiety for a really long time, there's a high probability that you have depression too, that you're experiencing depression too. Not that you have it, you're experiencing it.
Yeah.
Because I don't like saying people have anxiety. It's like, well, you're not anxiety, you're experiencing it. Yep. So they're called comorbid. So they typically go together, right? There's a high chance that if someone's experiencing anxiety, they're also experiencing depression. Because you can't sit there and worry and worry and worry for so long without feeling sad and depressed and helpless and worthless over it. So they typically go together. So if you're noticing that it's as intense as we explained it, it's been lasting a really long time, and it's having a negative impact on your social life, your occupational functioning, so like work, your general functioning in general, you need to go talk to somebody. And that doesn't mean that it's in your head and you're just broken because only certain types of people go get help. It's like, how does that help anything? You are deserving of asking for help. You are deserving of not having to deal with this. Anxiety can be crippling. It really can. It's not just, oh, you're just having thoughts and you can just turn them off. Like, no, it can be very damaging.
Yeah.
So go get help. That's why we're really talking about mental health this month, because there's so many people who are suffering unnecessarily, and you don't have to. You really don't have to.
When I think of that, why I brought that story there, because that was in the real moment, such an inexperience, at least for me. Not everyone might have had that experience, but as I was going up, the thoughts that I'm conditioned and the learned behavior that I have is to go into the woods and be fearful of everything, right? Whether there's a tree that's going to fall down in front of you, what are the statistical chances of that? Very, very slim. Whether there's going to be a random bear attack, what are the statistical probabilities of that happening? Very, very, very rare, 0.0001%. But yet, because I've been conditioned, and that's a learned behavior because of how I grew up, to make sure that I'm hyper aware and hypersensitive to anything that could go wrong, instead of focusing on what is going right, I had to work through in real time on my way up, instead of being crippled by my anxiety, which there was definitely a part of me that came in and said like, let's turn around. Let's not even try. I had to work in real time to overcome that and override that and really defeat that anxiety and say, you know what? I do believe I am more capable than these anxious thoughts. And I do believe in my ability to do this. Now, was it necessarily smart to do that? In hindsight, I learned a really, really valuable lesson about the ego versus anxious thoughts and where anxious thoughts can actually serve you in some capacity. But in all reality, what I was able to shift into a completely different version of myself to be able to pull myself out of the fear that I experienced up at the top, like Navy SEAL type approach. And I would have never been able to see that part of me come out had I just strictly listened to my anxiety. So that's a crazy, if you will, example. But guys, like, to be honest, like this happens in people's minds every single day, in people's hearts, in our experience in the every single day. And it, like I said, it might not be a 4,200 foot mountain, but it might feel that way. And so let's get rid of the invalidating people's experience, even if to some degree they might be constructed as a result of the conditioned and learned behavior. But at least let's talk about it so that we can process, so that we can heal, so that we can work to unlearn those conditioned responses, those thoughts, those behavior patterns that are making us feel like doggy doo-doo, right? So if I can do it, obviously I'm going to give you that belief. Y'all got this.
What's your episode suggestion?
So this one is episode number 66, The Power of Choice. And it kind of builds off my final takeaway, which is we might not feel as though we have a choice to recognize and defeat our anxiety. However, I genuinely know that you're not alone in that. And the masses of people who might not feel as though they have a choice, it actually shows a great opportunity of where choice could be implemented, meaning choosing to recognize, choosing to defeat, and joining in the massive force that's out there right now to be able to do that. What about you, B?
75 when intuition tells you otherwise.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, buddy. All right, my friends.
All right,
Thank
everyone.
you all for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to my rant.
It was good. It was great.
But I hope it's been helpful. If you are finding yourself struggling with this and with any of the topics that we're talking about, please do not hesitate to reach out to Emilia and myself. And if not us, reach out to some professional. You, like I said, you don't have to suffer with this. This does not have to take over your entire life. There is a way to handle it and to deal with it and to work through it, and it just takes you having the courage to decide you're deserving of that.
Well said, my friend. All right, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this. We hope you gain value through this, and we appreciate you joining us in this journey and being a part of yours. Have an amazing day. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.